Okay, so hello and welcome to our podcast. This is Culture Shock, and I am Tara.
I'm Ciara.
And I am Karen.
So, in this episode, we're going to be talking about the origin of the Irish LGBT movement and its successes and how it has impacted the life of LGBT people today. So, when I was researching, there were many important areas, aspects, and parts of Ireland's LGBT movement and history that I could focus on. Some more important than others, but I solely wanted to focus on a few incredibly important areas that were ever evolving and unfortunately are rarely ever taught in schools or talked about kind of, in public life. And that is the foundation of the Irish LGBT movement, the first Pride, and the AIDS crisis. So basically the aim for this podcast is we want this to be digestible, accessible, and just something for everyone's education and insight into the Irish LGBT community and its history. So it's circa 1970, and the wave from the aftermath of the Stonewall riots in New York has started to make its way across the Atlantic Ocean, developing into the foundation of the sexual liberation movement in Ireland in 1973. Fun fact, homosexuality was actually provided for under the Breton Laws, and for those who don't know about the Breton Laws, they were the legal system that existed in Ireland before the Normans and the English Commonwealth. Basically, it wasn't illegal. It was a sin, but it wasn't illegal.
So,
good. Yeah.
Freedom of choice.
Yeah, it was actually really progressive. Even women had a lot more rights than they do now. It's crazy, genuinely. But it goes without saying, I think one of the biggest names in the Irish LGBT movement was David Norris. He was a campaigner for gay rights and equality since the early 70s and actually started as a Trinity lecturer. So that was pretty cool. And actually, when I was researching, I found so many different grassroots communities that actually grew from student unions in Trinity, in Dublin and Cork actually, which was surprising because it's down south, but I thought that was really cool. So the sexual liberation movement consisted of Irish student counsellors and lecturers from Trinity who had met and then founded both the sexual liberation movement and the Union for Sexual Freedoms in Ireland. It was all about kind of trying to decriminalise homosexuality in Ireland because it was still a criminal offence under the law, which in the 1970s, that's not too long ago.
Yeah. It's 50?
Yeah, years ago, about 50 years ago, which is crazy to think about. So the movement literally just began with letters sent to the Irish Times. And what's funny is the Irish Times back then were actually kind of a bit more inclusive of the LGBT community, and just last year the Trans Riders Union actually had a boycott of the Irish Times because of opinion pieces that were labelled as transphobic. So
I unfortunately remember that.
Yeah, that was yeah. Basically the whole movement split into groups as they do, even in the LGBT community there's groups, that are TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists who are just transphobic, and there's a lot of people who are biphobic and everything. But this movement kind of split. There was a lot of people who wanted to solely focus on the criminality of it and how it was illegal, and there was other people that kind of just wanted to kind of expand the social scene for the gay community. So those splits happened, and then basically fast forward a few years, David Norris brought his case to the Irish court, the High Court. And what was cool about the case and interesting is that what he did was he said that why should it be illegal when the Irish public have a right to privacy? So, in everyone's homes and everything. Like, it was kind of like interesting that he was able to kind of point it at that.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing in my
business? Like, it was, you know, it did make sense. He lost. He brought it to the Supreme Court. He lost there. But a few years later, in 1988, which was like nearly 10 years later, he brought his case to the European Court of Human Rights and he won. So, but it didn't actually get decriminalized until 1993. Which is like 2 years before my older sister was born, which is crazy, and she's only like 26.
Oh my goodness.
It's crazy. Like, you really kind of think about it, and it's not too long ago, these things that have happened. I think moving on, when we hear about the LGBT movement, and I think a lot of allies and straight people, I think the first thing that they would think about is the Pride parades every year. Actually on my birthday, it's the 26th of June.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
It's actually just all about you.
It's all about me.
A ploy.
Sorry. It's a ploy. But basically, the first Pride parade wasn't until 1983, and it was only, I think it was 200 people that showed up, which is insane to think about the thousands that show up every year now. And there's like parades all over the country. But basically, the Pride parade started to kind of commemorate the Stonewall riots, because that kind of just had a ripple effect across the whole world. And also it was a resistance and retaliation aimed at highlighting the violence endured by the LGBT community in Ireland that stemmed from the violent and unfortunately fatal attack on Declan Flynn in Dublin's Fairview Park in the 1980s. He was attacked by 5 men and he died in hospital, and they actually got suspended sentences, so they never actually went to prison, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
No, and they actually, what was like awful to like hear when I was like researching was the 5 guys said that they were trying to get rid of homosexuals. So
it implies they have done it before.
Yeah, and they probably did it again.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's like so much to go into in terms of like the Irish government just pushing things under the rug.
We could go on about that.
Yeah,
that's another podcast.
Yeah, that's for next week. Yeah, but basically in the 70s, before Pride, there was actually annual picnics held in Merrion Square to commemorate the Stonewall riots, as I said. And this morphed into a very small Pride march in June 1974, where only 10 people attended, which was crazy. And those 10 people, you know, they were still fearful that they'd lose their jobs, that they'd lose kind of family members, friends. And some of them did. And, you know, it's sad to think about that all they wanted to do was just kind of like be confident in themselves and just kind of be who they were. The first Pride was in 1979, the first Pride week. And the first large-scale LGBT protest march was in 1983, and then that was on June 25th, and 200 people walked from St. Stephen's Green to the GPO. And what I like when I was researching the Pride marches, it was really cool. Like, some of the events that they had were ridiculous, but they were also really cool. So basically, a group of gay men and women would have an event during the week of Pride, and it was called the Pubs app. So they would wear a pink carnation, which kind of symbolised the LGBT movement, and just like Pride badges, and they'd go into a few pubs across Dublin and see how long it would take before they'd get kicked out.
I love
or
that.
barred.
Bring that back.
And they did that like for so many years.
I don't know what the modern version of that is, but I'm doing it.
I think like the longest one was like 8 pubs someone got into, and then they got barred. But
I don't know how I would do that, but I would do that.
Yeah, I feel like that would be really cool. Just go into like a really like old-fashioned pub in like rural Ireland. Just like get the stairs.
So what's up, lads? I love women. Can I have a pint?
Just go into the George, you know. they won't bury you. And actually, another cool thing was lesbian activist Joni Crone, who was in the first Pride March, actually gave a satirical speech at the GPO that was a reworking of the 1916 proclamation into a speech of gay rights. And I wanted to find like a piece of it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. But I thought that was cool. It was kind of like, you know,
creative.
It was, yeah.
It kind of honours our history as well.
And it was funny. It was just like, it was just a joke. But yeah, so then I think Pride is still a huge thing, like today. I think it hasn't been big for the past 2 years because of COVID, but I think this year there will definitely be a bigger march and just parade and events. And I think it's something that we really, as a country, should be talked about and get schools involved, colleges involved, and just like, you know, it's just something that people can just celebrate, like who they are, you know, no matter what label.
Be who you are for your Pride.
Literally, yeah. I'd love to attend. I've never attended Pride. I'd love to attend it.
Neither
No,
have I, no.
I've never been. I'd love to go.
I've never had enough friends. They go, but they
I've
go
never
without me.
I've never had enough gay friends.
No, I did. Yeah, they
Always
just
go
go without
alone
me.
and then meet people there.
Yeah,
that's
I think
the
it's such an
great way.
easy place to make friends because
Definitely.
everyone's just kind of like,
I remember once they were like, "Oh, you could go, but you're bisexual." And I was
oh,
like,
they're
I
yeah.
was like, okay, well, we're gonna go.
What
to the car
is
park
it
now.
about people, especially like there's such a thing of like lesbians being like, I don't want to get with bisexual women because they're not gay, but I'm like, I know everyone has their preference,
It's
but
a bit of a stigma.
I'd argue
it is stigma, yeah.
It
Like
is,
I
yeah.
think like you love who you love, like it's
Yeah.
not about, it shouldn't be about like kind of labels.
Like labels and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
And the argument some of them use is like, they could just date a man afterwards. And I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, and
like
nothing to do.
bi women still love women.
Get a grip.
So
Yeah.
on to the AIDS epidemic in Ireland, and I think when I was researching this was probably like the saddest thing that I read because there was no help at all, and the only help that was given was totally like false. It was like misinformation, and it was just awful. And it didn't only affect the LGBT community, but it also affected intravenous drug users, sex workers, and haemophiliacs, which is like a condition where your blood clots easily. So basically, what I found was there's not much history kind of on the AIDS epidemic in Ireland. There isn't much like articles about it that I could find that were kind of like factual, but I found that there's an Irish AIDS memorial project created by Tony Walsh, which is like an LGBT rights campaigner, and I definitely think that's something people should check out if they want to learn more. But basically, you know, it was the early 80s, homophobia was still crippling Ireland, being gay was still a crime, and the epidemic caused mass hysteria among the Irish public, and who wished to blame certain minority groups and just push it under the rug, even though people in straight relationships could get AIDS too. And actually, I think I read a statistic that actually said now, I think in Ireland or in some other, or in just Europe, there's actually a lot more straight people in like straight relationships that are actually contracting AIDS, you know.
Because I think, especially in the queer community, it's such a thing. So many people talk about getting tested and the importance
Yeah.
of it. Like, I know so many people who get tested
Same,
regularly, and
yeah.
I don't think, in the nicest way possible, I don't think the straight people have caught on yet.
No, I
I
still think
understand.
there's this kind of like,
Stigma.
there's a stigma, and there's also this kind of like thought process of, oh well, I can't get it because I'm straight, which is totally false. Like,
The
if
disease
anything,
doesn't actually just go, it's like gay people.
yeah, like even, oh my god, I read that when things started opening up again, like last year, there was an outbreak of syphilis in the country.
Yeah.
Because I was like,
People were
what
just
the hell?
Going for it.
Yeah, I was like,
The 60s.
like there's still, and there's like a gay sort of like LGBT website, an Irish one I think, that do sort of like surveys and stuff among gay and straight people, but they actually found that there's still a lot of gay and straight people that still think that you can get AIDS from like sitting on a public toilet or kind of like through like people's like saliva and things like that, and I'm just like,
I think that's where the lack of education in schools come into play.
no,
then, 'cause,
yeah,
like,
we're not
people
taught
don't
about
know.
it in
It's not
schools.
taught, exactly.
We have atrocious sexual
Yeah.
education, so you know nothing about STIs or STDs.
And they only call it like STDs. They don't actually say the names of them. They don't kind of say what you have to do. They're kind of just like, go to a doctor. But I'm like,
You never know the signs.
no,
Exactly.
like just, you know, just tell people to practice safe sex and
Moral
like
of the
teach.
story: get tested.
Yeah, and you
It's
can
free.
get, I think you can actually, yeah, you can get free tests actually in the LGBT society.
Yeah.
So, and they're usually, if you wanted to get the test like privately, I think it's like €20, but I think they should all be free everywhere.
Free testing.
But yeah, so obviously this led to severe stigma and in public conversation and the media, and I think the media is solely to blame, I think, for what was spread, because what I saw that was spread in terms of the gay community was atrocious. So basically, the Leinster Times was definitely one of the big ones. They created an article and they published it expressing how it wasn't AIDS that was the killer disease, it was homosexuality. And people agreed with that. And, you know, the Leinster Times as a whole province, it's, you know, it went all over the country, and it spread false narratives of gay men just having unprotected sex whenever they wanted, that they were, you know, polyamorous, that all these things. And not saying any of that is bad, but it's not entirely true either. So in response, and there was no government kind of initiative at the time, there was no government response, they wanted to not talk about it. And what it was interesting was the UK, although kind of still having the same sort of like stigma around it, did try and help a little bit more than Ireland. And usually when kind of the UK does something, Ireland kind of follows suit. So
Princess
it was
Diana was great for that.
Yeah.
A gay icon.
Yes.
We love Princess
We
Diana.
love Princess
but
Diana.
She did so much for destigmatizing.
I remember
AIDS.
I remember like there was she was on like one of her tours or something, and she went to I can't remember which place it was, but she hugged a child that was HIV positive, and people could not get over it. They were like, oh my god, you're going to get AIDS now. And she was just like,
no.
that's not how it works. It's not how it works. It's not like a cold or anything. Like,
she was such an ally.
yeah. And there was like so many people that were allies, and like when you think of celebrities too, like you think of like what's his name from Queen? Freddie Mercury.
Was very close to Princess Diana.
Yeah.
And Elton John.
Elton John
actually nearly beat up Prince Charles at Diana's funeral. Google it.
I actually heard about that.
He was texting Camilla.
Camilla. Oh my god.
Yeah.
I love how like the AIDS epidemic just kind of crosses over to like the royal family.
Just to get to talk about Diana.
Yeah. Princess Diana Appreciation Club. But basically LGBT groups came together to form the Gay Health Action Organisation, and it was inevitably left to the LGBT community to care for each other and respond to the crisis. They got no funding or help from the government, even though they had asked multiple times. The government said that they did not want to be associated with something like that, which is ridiculous when it's a health crisis. So basically leaflets were created which had like kind of like images of gay men embracing and stuff, and they also had like lots of information about what AIDS and HIV were, how you could contract it, and what to do if you did contract it, and how to practice safe sex, of course, and, you know, the use of condoms and everything like that. So there were very few mainstream media outlets that actually helped spread factual information of the AIDS epidemic, but one of the few and the biggest was Ireland's first commercial queer magazine called Out in the 80s, and it was just a magazine just filled with things, you know, from the LGBT community in Ireland, kind of, you know, just creating this community that people were able to kind of be a part of. So they helped give information support and knowledge of what to do if you did contract AIDS. And it wasn't until 1987 that the Irish media and the government finally decided to fund a campaign surrounding AIDS. Bottom line, it was unhelpful. It was fear-mongering and not realistic information. So basically their slogan was "Casual sex spreads AIDS." And basically that just reinforced the closeness the church had with the state, and still does, fear-mongering people into buying into the no sex until marriage trope, and it just promoted celibacy as a solution, which was ridiculous. Yeah. And the ad, I actually watched the ad, do look it up, it's on YouTube. It's a 30-second ad, and basically it's two straight people, like a man and a woman, and they're basically gambling. And like the whole point, yeah, it was on Reeling in the Years. Yeah,
Reeling in the Years even, yeah.
Yeah, it was on Reeling in the Years, but basically it was like this like really like horror like music, and it was like if you're gambling with something, you're gambling with AIDS and all this, and like to just basically not have sex.
But like you can also not have sex and still get AIDS if you're doing intravenous drugs.
Exactly. It was ridiculous.
If you're getting tattooed illegally.
Yeah.
Go to a professional.
But yeah, that's what the Irish government decided to do, and it was like, it was almost laughable when I watched the ad. I was like, how did people let this get on air? And it was harmful too, because it just reinforced the fact that like there's this sort of stigma around AIDS that it's like a dirty thing, that like you don't want to be around someone like that, and it's still like that today. There's only one free health clinic for gay men in Ireland, and it was actually closed down during the pandemic. I think it's opened up again on like a part-time basis, but that's basically one of the few clinics that you can go in that you have peace of mind and you can go in and get checked, and I think that's ridiculous in this day and age. But yeah, so that's it. That's the 3 sort of big things that have happened in Irish history, got to do with the LGBT movement. And these things are rarely taught in schools, and I think they should be taught in schools, because if schools want to preach equality and want to be LGBT safe, then they need to teach people about the LGBT community, because it's only fair. And yeah, so that's it. That's our first episode done. And in our second episode, Karen will be hosting, and you'll be going through
some of the cultural changes that have occurred in Ireland since the early times.
Yeah. Okay.
Very exciting.
Thank you guys for watching.